Hey, Blue Table fans! Today we're going to talk about Ordnance and Barrage weapons. This is a how to play Warhammer 40k. We have here an Imperial Guard Manticore missile launcher, and we have as volunteers as our test subjects a unit of Blood Angels, and backing them up a Razorback and Predator. So let's look at how it's done and the various scenarios. Let's talk about the Manticore. The Manticore has a Strength 10 AP4, Ordnance, Barrage D3, and large blast template. So if it wants to shoot at the attack squad here, the assault squad, it has a range of 24 inches to 120 inches, so this one is a little unusual in that it has a minimum range, which I've measured, and they are outside of the 24 inches. And so what we do is, like all blast weapons, we place the template over one model in the target unit. So let's go ahead and just place it over this guy right here. That looks like I'm going to get the most amount of hits, and let's roll them. And away we go. So I've rolled a hit, so that means I hit exactly where I was going to, and that means I have affected 5 guys. Now this is also, so that's how you would do an ordnance weapon. An ordnance really only affects how many times the vehicle can shoot. But it also gives an additional bonus that if you hit a vehicle with an ordnance weapon, when you roll for your armor penetration, strength 10 in this case, you would roll 2 dice, and you would pick the highest of the 2 dice, which will give you about another 1.5 to 2 extra armor penetration for that weapon. Now, this is also a barrage weapon, so a barrage weapon doesn't need line of sight. Of course, there is line of sight in this case, but if this building were like this, so now we're talking about barrage. Ordnance only has 2 effective changes to how it works. One is it affects how many weapons can shoot on the firing vehicle or model, and it also affects armor penetration. Now, barrage weapons don't need line of sight. So if this building had blocked line of sight here from the Manticore to the assault squad, I still could have shot at it. The difference is, when I rolled my scatter dice, I would not have subtracted my 3 ballistic skill. So normally it would have only scattered 4 inches that way, but because it is indirect fire, i.e. I don't have line of sight, it scatters the full amount of the 2 dice and does not subtract the firer's ballistic skill. Okay, let's talk more about barrage. So you determine where the first barrage hits. So in this case, I do have line of sight, so I am going to subtract my ballistic skill. I placed it here. 4 inches would put it right about there, which would affect no targets. However, this is barrage D3. So let's roll them. That would be 3 barrage templates. So in short, what's going to happen is 2 other templates besides the one, for a total of 3, are either going to hit in the exact same spot, or they're going to flip off of the first one like this and possibly hit other targets. Let's talk more about placing multiple barrage markers. This is on page 34 of the rulebook, and it's called multiple barrages. So what you do is, if the barrage is coming from a group of models, let's say 3 models in a squad all have barrage weapons, you fire with the closest model first. In my case, there's only 1, so that really isn't relevant. However, the first step is to place the initial barrage. In this case, I get 3. So I pull out my 3 large templates, and so I have to determine where the first one goes. Now, I've removed the targets because they were kind of getting in the way. I just want to show you how this works. So you place your first one. So this has a scatter of 5 inches. So if I had direct line of sight, I would subtract my ballistic skill, and I would go 2 inches. So 5 minus 3 ballistic skill is 2 inches this way, and that's where my initial template would be placed. Now this is very important because the other ones come off of that. Now I described a flipping action, but that where the other ones would flip off of that one like this. But that's only a simplistic view of it. It's actually a little bit more complicated, and you actually have a lot of control over how this goes. So what you do is you roll only a scatter dice for the subsequent barrages. And so let's roll. So that's a hit. Now, a hit is interesting because it means that I get to place this template as long as it's in contact with the other one any way that I want. So, for example, I could have it overlap completely because that's touching. I could have it barely touch on one side as I pleased, or you can even have it partially overlap like that. Now, so this one allowed me to place it how I pleased. So I'm going to go ahead and place it like that. And then now, if I had rolled an arrow, I would go to the edge that the arrow is pointing to, in this case this edge, and I would have to place the template exactly like that. I would have no other choices. So an arrow forces your hand and means that you have to place it in a certain way. So now, let's say I had rolled an arrow for that one, and then my third barrage for my manticore rolls an arrow this way, so that comes also off of my initial template. So what would happen is I would place the last template like this. And in fact, theoretically, you could roll it and you could have two templates on top of each other, in which case everybody underneath this template would have been hit twice. So, but let's say I rolled a hit. Now I can place this template in contact with any of the previously placed templates in any way that I choose. I could go like that, I could go like this, I could march it off even further. And let me read you verbatim what it says. If a hit is rolled, the firing player places the marker so that it touches any part of any marker in the group that has already been placed. Note that it is perfectly fine if some markers are placed overlapping another. So, once all your markers have been placed, you resolve hits and wounds separately for each marker. So this is extremely important for wound allocation. So let's go ahead and put my guys on top here. So let's say this is how they had been, my guys had been placed. And so the question is, how many hits would be here? Well, this marker would have affected two guys, so I'd roll to wound and to save and whatnot from them. It's only AP 4 for this weapon, strength 10 though, so I'd roll 2 wounds. These guys would get their 3-up saves, and they would both make it. Now, the reason this is important is that wounds are taken as if the shot had come from the center of the blast template. So wound allocation, let's say I had rolled 2 fails here, a 1 and a 2. Oh no, so 2 guys die. Well, of course, both would be dead. That's a bad example. So let's say 1 lives. Well, which guy dies? This guy is technically, quote, the closest model, so it would remove that. And then over here, these guys would be affected twice by 2 templates. Now stepping up to volunteer are 2 Blood Angels vehicles. By the way, at the time of this taping, all of these models are available on our web store. This notably part of a giant Imperial Guard army. And if these have already sold, definitely check out the web store anyway. We're always putting up new things. All right, so let's move on. Now let's take a look at a barrage weapon versus vehicles. In this case, the Manticore over here is a strength 10 weapon, so that means it's really good against vehicles. Has a very high strength, probably the highest. So you'd place your initial template, so this is a barrage weapon. Now, any type of blast weapon can be placed on any part of the hull of a vehicle. So in this case, you could actually clip 2 vehicles. And since it's now full strength against anything that is touched by the template, you can actually get a vehicle that's relatively far away too. In fact, whatever the distance is here, I think it's 3 inches. You could actually, well, it'd have to be a tad closer, but you get the idea. So let's go ahead and roll. I got 2 6s and a scatter, so that is going to be in that case, minus 3 inches, still going to be 9 inches, but that's going to be well off. So let's go ahead and pretend like we hit something. So this was a 4 and a 2 and a scatter this way. So minus 3 inches would be 3 inches going here. So you actually still would clip both vehicles. Now, because it's a barrage weapon, you would then flip the other ones off of the first one. So let's go ahead and roll one. That's an arrow that way. So you would actually touch it here, and that is where that would be. So this vehicle would get hit with the second one. And so we've got those two. Can I balance that? Okay, I think that's actually going to work. Oh, nope, it didn't. Okay, and then my third roll, we're going to call that a hit. So now what I could do is I could place the last template anywhere touching the first two. So I'd probably do something like that and hit both vehicles again. So we'd end up with two hits, excuse me, and this one that's scattered off this way would have been, so it would have been 3 hits on the Predator and 2 hits on the Razorback. Of course, not everyone is going to parking lot these like so conveniently for you, but you'd be surprised on some of the cramped battlefields. You can get those pretty sweet shots, and it also makes your opponent deal with it. It makes them have to gives them like another thing to think about. So now, as with an ordnance weapon, so this was an ordnance barrage weapon, which is what is so great about the Manticore. So it would actually roll best of 2 dice for every single hit. So you'd roll twice for each. So this one would get 3 hits. So we'd roll strength 10. Oh, and by the way, it hits the side armor. So I do believe the Predator's 11, the Rhino is 10. So let's go against this one. So that would be best out of 2, a 5 and a 2. Can you read that? Yes, you can. So that would be 15, a penetrating hit. The next one would be 16, a penetrating hit. The next one would be 12, which would still be a penetrating hit. So that vehicle would be in an extremely bad way. And now on the Razorback, you would likewise roll. Well, if you think about it, the only way to get a glancing hit on, well, you couldn't get a glancing hit. They would all be penetrating hits. The only way to get a glancing hit here against armor 11 would be to basically roll double ones. So effectively, this vehicle, this Manticore against vehicles is almost a guaranteed penetrating hit, and a very wide spread for your multiple blast templates there. So that is ordnance weapons. Ordnance weapons, just to recap, only really have 2 rules. One of them is limits the shooting, so it's a disadvantage, and the other one is that it's doubles. You roll twice for armor penetration and take the best of the 2 rolls. So that's what that looks like. Now for barrage weapons, just to recap, a barrage weapon does not need line of sight. They do have minimum range. They can be indirect fire, which means if you can see your target, you scatter the normal amount minus your ballistic skill. And if you can't see your target, you simply don't subtract your ballistic skill from it. Now, also, for determining cover, saves, and wound allocation, you go as if the shot had come not from the firer, but from this little hole in the template right there. And that is very important and allows you to get at targets from an unusual angle depending on your placement in the unit. So, barrages also have pinning. And if you have a multiple barrage, you establish your first location here, and then depending on whether, if you roll an arrow, it touches the edge. If you roll a hit, it can be anywhere on the template. Any of the previous placed ones, something that I did not know before. I actually learned something new here. All right, thank you very much for tuning in. And please do give us an email or a call when you are ready to have your army professionally assembled and painted. And on top of that, we can advise you on how to form your army list. Check the liner notes for contact details.